Hi friends, it's your boy Cranberry Enthusiast, and welcome to this next exciting episode, the third episode of this series, in which we are reading the book of Daniel. We're in Daniel chapter 3 today, and I'm a bit tired, but hopefully this is still a very inspiring, educational even, entertaining, and maybe even, I don't know, semi-relaxing. I don't know, I personally I will put on YouTube videos of people rambling about various things or reading different Bible things or things. You gotta be careful with that though sometimes because, anyway. As always, this series is completely live and largely unedited, so whatever happens. If you have any questions, if I say something very strange and you have any questions, and I don't realize, anyway, feel free to comment down below with whatever you want. You can ask me a question about giraffes, actually, which would make sense today. Also, happy March, even though it's not March right now, that you're probably watching this either in March or, well, after March, but anyway, happy March. Let's get right into this. So, Daniel, chapter 3. Nebuchadnezzar the king, which, as you'll remember, he's kind of been the antagonist of the book of Daniel so far, and maybe he'll have a redemption arc. Who knows? We'll have to keep reading to find out. Nebuchadnezzar the king made a statue of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So I have a note here that says that the statue was about 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. So if we think about, you know, a story being like a building, like a 10-story building being 90 feet high, so each story being like 9 feet, which I think a story is typically a little more than 9 feet. But anyway, so it's about the size of a 10-story building, and it's only like 1 story wide. So I actually have a very crude but very or overall accurate little model here. So we have essentially a little thing built here out of Lego bricks that is approximately 10 times as tall here as it is wide this way. And so this is like the size of one thing. So this would be like a 9-foot person standing in front of the statue. So obviously, and if I am correct, I think most people, especially in ancient times, were a lot shorter than 9 feet. Naturally, given that most people today are a lot shorter than 9 feet. But anyway, this is just kind of like the scale of what we're looking at here. So this is a massive colossal statue, and it seems probably not super, well, I don't know, maybe it was super structurally sound, but I just, you know, I think if there'd be a giant wind, like, you could easily blow it over, but I don't know. Maybe it was well supported on either sides. Or maybe there just wasn't really tornadoes in the Middle East where Babylon was at the time. Anyway, so let's get on with the story. Now that we have that helpful, or hopefully helpful, illustration. If you couldn't stand that illustration, please let me know in the comments below, because I do really want to know. Okay, next verse. Nebuchadnezzar the king also sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects and the governors, the counselors, the chief treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the administrators of the province to come to the dedication of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So what are satraps? A satrap is a provincial governor in the ancient Persian Empire. Okay, yeah, and that would make sense. And so the prefects, what are prefects? In some schools, a senior student authorized to enforce discipline. Oh, okay. So this would probably include like Daniel and his friends. So anyway, so King Nebuchadnezzar got this statue, and he's inviting a ton of all the important people essentially in his empire to the dedication of the statue. Hopefully it wasn't a windy day. I am getting a phone call, but it's from an unknown number. I don't know, is it showing? Anyway, I do not take those calls, which that's a whole other story in and of itself. Let's continue on here. So then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the chief treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the administrators of the provinces, all the really important people, so to speak, were assembled for the dedication of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So they're at this dedication, they're standing before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "To you the command is given, you peoples, nations, and populations of all languages, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of musical instruments, you are to fall down and worship the golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up." So let's just pause right there. We can get a little bit more information about Nebuchadnezzar. He seems to like to do things very extravagantly. He didn't just invite the governors. He invited the satraps, prefects, governors, counselors, chief treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the administrators. He lets like a whole list. And then I'm sure he probably gave the herald a thing or something, but the herald is like, when you hear, so all you people, when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the psaltery, bagpipe, he's just listing the entire orchestra here at this point, which sounds really impressive to have so much anyway. So, but yeah, and the thing is, so when they hear the music, they're supposed to fall down and worship the golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. So they're supposed to worship the statue, giant statue made of gold, which, can you imagine? I wondered if, was it all like completely solid gold? Because, man, like, I don't even know if, I don't know, could like, well, I'm sure the richest people in the world today could build something of the sort, but, like, that's a lot of gold. Even just a 9-foot tall thing of gold would be, anyway, a giant gold cube would probably be set for life. Anyway, so anyway, and so what would make sense to my mind here is that the golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar made, or like, and to me, and maybe I have this entirely wrong, so of course take everything I say with a grain of pepper and salt, depending on your taste in spices, I don't know, whatever salt and pepper are. Anyway, but this giant golden statue, which I did not intend to keep holding here, but here I am, the giant golden statue is seemingly kind of representative of Nebuchadnezzar's might and power. So it's like his reign. So in other words, by proxy, most likely Nebuchadnezzar is like trying to exalt himself and being like, you're kind of like, you know, by worshiping the statue, it's like you're almost like worshiping him. And sure, maybe it's not exactly like that. And again, maybe I have that entirely off base, but given my knowledge of kind of ancient culture as well as like idolatry and stuff like that, that's what kind of makes sense to me. And it seems to be kind of in line with Nebuchadnezzar's thing. I mean, this statue is something that Nebuchadnezzar, you know, built, which probably looked, to be fair, a lot prettier than just this stack of bricks. But anyway, so anyway, so the command is given for all these people to worship this giant golden statue, which is probably shaped like a man, since it's like most idols were shaped like men or women, or man in the gender neutral sense, or however you want to say it. Anyway, so, but the herald continues, "But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be thrown into the middle of a furnace of blazing fire." Well, how about that? So, yes, consequences of not worshiping this thing are pretty great here. I mean, it's kind of like you're gonna die, which being burned alive is one of the very worst ways to die. I mean, there's so many horrible ways to die, but being burned alive, yeah. So that's a pretty high thing. And let's keep going on here. So the herald said that, and therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of musical instruments, all the peoples, nations, and populations of all languages fell down and worshipped the golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So people are largely complying here and doing that. For this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward. So Chaldeans, kind of like the wise men of Babylon, kind of like astrologers, basically, Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews, meaning Daniel and his friends, or maybe other Jews too, but people from Israel. They began to speak and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every person who hears the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe. I love this in the Bible so much, and it's kind of become a humorous, like it's not intended to be humorous here, I don't believe, but in certain modern literature, it's kind of a humorous thing when you just keep repeating the whole grand list over and over, and so the fact that this is the third time that these instruments are all completely named. And so, anyway, but yeah, they list them all out, and bagpipe and all kind of musical instruments is to fall down and worship the golden statue. So the Chaldeans continue, but whoever does not fall down and worship shall be thrown into the middle of a furnace of blazing fire. Which, speaking of a furnace of blazing fire, there's a very, I'm probably not going to get into it, but I don't know, at some point, remind me to talk about I have different, like, theories in terms of almost, like, if we could, even if it's not directly in the text, like some symbolic allegory of this story of the golden image, the idol, and the fiery furnace. But anyway, so the Chaldeans continue, there are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods, nor do they worship the golden statue which you have set up. So the Chaldeans, who probably didn't really like, the Jews, and specifically, I wonder why Daniel is not particularly mentioned here. I guess, like, he was so high up that the king was like, yeah, he doesn't need to come. Or maybe he was away on business, I don't know. But anyway, so but Daniel's three friends here, they're not serving this giant hunk of gold, and nor really should they, I do believe. It's a hunk of gold. And so Nebuchadnezzar, so anyway, so the Chaldeans are like, they're probably jealous of these guys, because the king greatly honored him, if you remember in the last chapter with Daniel and his friends and everything. So anyway, it seems like they're kind of acting out of jealousy, or spite, or just, or maybe they're just trying to find favor with the king, and they think the best way to do it is to tear, their colleagues down, basically, or to, like, So anyway, the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are, kind of essentially doing the right thing in the face of very firm and crazy, like, adversity, with, like, the threat of being burned alive, which, anyway. So let's go on. I wonder how Nebuchadnezzar will respond to this. He'd probably think it's okay, right? I mean, given, the fact that, he had that experience with, with Daniel, and Daniel typically refers to God as the God of heaven, so that's how I'll be kind of talking in this thing. But surely the king still remembers his experience with the God of heaven, and he'll understand, right? Nothing bad can happen here, right? So let's continue here. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and anger, again, this guy's kind of got some anger issues, gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar began speaking, and said to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, nor worship the golden statue that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, they're doing it again, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of musical instruments, to fall down and worship the statue that I have made, very well. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be thrown into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire, and what god is there who can rescue you from my hands? Okay, so it seems like Nebuchadnezzar's kind of forgot all about the God of Heaven at this point. I love, again, this is the fourth, so we had the herald listed it, then just the narrator mentioned the music, then the Chaldeans listed everything out. Nebuchadnezzar, they're really proud of their orchestra. Like, man, the musicians back then were probably way more honored than, like, well, I don't know, I mean, famous celebrity musicians are really honored today and stuff too, but anyway, this is so So, and yeah, and he's like, what God is there who can rescue you from my hand? So King Nebuchadnezzar seems kind of still maybe a little bit full of himself, like he seems to think that he's kind of, and in many ways he is, you know, he's probably the most powerful human being on the planet at that point, in terms of his power and everything. Shout out the long age of monarchies and everything, which is still actually present today. But anyway, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we are not in need of an answer to give you concerning this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods, nor worship the golden statue that you have set up. Shout out the guts, for lack of a better term, of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Like, they you know, they're giving the king this answer, and it's such an eloquent, and shout out their faith there, because they're like, they say that God will rescue us if he's able to rescue us, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But then they also say, but even if he does not. So it's like they know that God can rescue them. They have that faith that God can save them from being burned alive. But even if he does not, like, they are still going to choose to do the right, even if, you know, there's another part in the Bible where it talks about people not loving their lives so much that they shrank from death. And it's like, I mean, sure, I'm very sure that they did not want it all to die, or to, you know, experience, I mean, who would? No one in their right mind wants to experience being burned alive, you know, or really, like, die in any way, unless there's, you know, like a greater purpose behind it, or there's a particular reason, if they're in their right mind. You know, someone could die for someone else, take a bullet for somebody else because they love the other person, like, but, you know, someone who, and, you know, it's I'm getting a little bit sidetracked here, but anyway, shout out this I think is the first recorded words, which it says that they all replied together. Sometimes, I mean, it probably wasn't this way, it was probably just one of them talking, but sometimes when it talks about them saying it together, I imagine that they're all just saying it in unison. So just three guys saying that in complete unison. But anyway, let's continue on, turn in the page. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, which, you know, again, guy seems to have maybe a bit of anger issues, and his facial expression was changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Interesting. So maybe he, like, almost didn't believe that. He was like, you know, these are my guys. Like, surely they're going to do what I say. Like, you know. And then the Chaldeans come in, and they're like, oh, like, I'm hearing these reports, but I want to hear it from you guys, because, you know, you guys got it right? You're gonna worship this hunk of gold that you know I made, and you know, and you're gonna listen to this giant orchestra that I'm gonna name every single instrument. So, but then they confirm, like, the Chaldeans are telling the truth, that they weren't gonna bow down to the giant golden statue. So anyway, and that's what from my understanding, that's what it means, that his facial expression was changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Meaning, not just that he, like, suddenly frowned at them, which he probably did too, like, literally, but also, like, his facial expression representing his countenance, or the way he perceived them, the way he thought of them. So it was like, wait a minute, you guys aren't actually going to do whatever I say. And so anyway, that's, Nebuchadnezzar had I wonder if you could call that a repentance, because his mind was changed. Repentance is a whole other conundrum, rabbit hole thing, something, I don't know. But let's get back to the text here. He answered, so Nebuchadnezzar answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And back in ancient times, the number 7 is the key. Number 7 is typically referred to as God's number, and number 7 refers to generally like wholeness, completeness, 7 days in a week. And so by him saying to heat the furnace 7 times more, it's most likely not just an arbitrary number. It's like, basically, get it as hot as you can get it. So furnace, so this is, which I wonder what Babylonian architecture would be like. I'd love to watch some sort of like documentary. I mean, if it was interesting enough about like ancient Babylonian architecture and the way that Babylon did stuff. Because man, like this furnace must obviously be big enough to put people in it. And wonder how big though. Like was it this giant vat of lava that they? I don't know. Anyway, so. And he, Nebuchadnezzar, ordered certain valiant warriors who were in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So Nebuchadnezzar is staying true to his word, basically. He's like, yeah, which, again, guy seems to have anger. He seems to be acting in anger here. So anyway, then these men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, their other clothes, and were thrown into the middle of the furnace of blazing fire. Also, shout out this the more literal translations talk about because they were wearing turbans, as was traditional back then and stuff for everyone in Babylon, and even in the Middle East today. But this translation just renders it their caps. So anyway, and their other clothes, and were thrown into the middle of the furnace of blazing fire. So the end is this the end of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Let's find out. For this reason, because the king's command was harsh, and the furnace had been made extremely hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So anyway, the furnace is so hot that the guys who were just walking to throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace, they die of like heat stroke, or maybe they caught on fire just because it's so crazy hot. Like I wonder, temperature-wise, how hot that would be. Like, it might have literally have been giant, like, molten metal type hot. Like, anyway. But these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the middle of the furnace of blazing fire, still tied up. And so, dun dun dun. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up quickly. He said to his counselors, "Was it not 3 men that we threw bound into the middle of the fire?" They replied to the king, "Absolutely, O king." He responded, "Look, I see 4 men, untied and walking about in the middle of the fire unharmed, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." So that's kind of wild. And apparently the great fiery furnace had a viewing chamber, like probably far enough away, but at least they were able to see inside and saw, like, yeah. So there are 4, which we'll get back to that here, but let's continue up. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of blazing fire. He said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the middle of the fire. The satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men, nor was their hair of their heads singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had even the smell of fire touched them. Which I'd also shout out, it's just 4 different groups of people listed there. I wonder if it's everybody and they just shortened the list, but I don't know. With the satraps, prefects, governors, king's counselors. So, but anyway, more wild, these guys, so they were thrown into the fire, but the fire didn't harm them at all. And like, seemingly, the fire, had no effect on the bodies of these men. They didn't burn at all. It was as if they weren't in fire at all. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command, and surrendered their bodies rather than serve or worship any god except their own God." Which, shout out, Nebuchadnezzar, I mean, sure, he was very violent, kind of homicidal, especially early on in the book of Daniel. Very kind of, egotistical, full of himself. But he like has these mood swings just like crazy, which to be fair, he experiences a ton of wild things. I mean, can you imagine what your reaction would be if you saw someone, say even something a little bit less, like someone hit by like a truck or something, and you see like their body well, I don't want to create bad visions for people, but like, someone going through this horrible accident and they look completely like mangled and dead, and then they like get up as though nothing happened to them. and like not a single bone is broken, and like, that's pretty wild. So Nebuchadnezzar's astoundment, and you know and it's shout out to Nebuchadnezzar, like props to him to recognizing, uh like he actually listened to what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, because he's like, blessed be their God, and that he's like, oh yeah, their God obviously saved them. So Nebuchadnezzar continues, therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or population of any language that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses made a rubbish heap, because there is no other God who is able to save in this way. Which again, very violent, but shout out, just the idea, they shall be torn limb from limb. I feel like it's like a cartoon of like Genghis Khan, torn limb from limb, and their houses made a rubbish heap. There's a Bible verse to, put on your wall. But yeah, so this is his like second major recorded thing of, of God doing something wild. First with his dream, and second here with this fire miracle. And shout out the poor guys who died in bringing them there. They didn't even get to see. Can you imagine those guys, like, if they in the afterlife or whatever, if they somehow were able to see what happened? Like, man, it's kind of awful. But and to close out the chapter here, then the king made Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego prosperous in the province of Babylon. So again, almost kind of like in the opposite of, say, A Series of Unfortunate Events, the book series. Each of these chapters in Daniel, there's always a problem arises, but Daniel and or his friends, like, they follow whatever God says, whether through the law or through just, knowing what's the right thing to do. And like, God miraculously moves, and it's like, everything kind of ends really well every single time. It's like they're being very blessed, even though they're going through absolutely crazy things. Two quick things before we kind of finish up for today. The first is I want to kind of go back to talking about the fourth man, and if you're familiar at all with like the Book of Daniel, most of this is probably already really like familiar to you anyway. But I'm just gonna say it because I think it's very key. But the fourth guy, there are a lot of people who believe that fourth guy who's in the fire that Nebuchadnezzar saw was the pre-incarnated appearance of Jesus. In other words, before Jesus was born at Christmas time, but not really Christmas time, but maybe at Christmas time, we don't know. Anyway, but obviously this is, hundreds of years before then. And so, yeah, but like God himself, or as Nebuchadnezzar refers to it, like, who sent his angel and rescued his servants. So like, and so, yeah, and can you imagine what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were, can you imagine, well, I mean, did they feel any heat? I wonder, like, what was that like? Did the flames, was it just like ripping around them, but like, was it like they were like standing in the middle of a hologram, where it's like there's light and fire and stuff, but it's like, they obviously were not affected and stuff. But so anyway, so the first point, it's and I tend to lean that way myself. Jesus, this is the Old Testament, but like Jesus appears in the fire with these guys, like, which is kind of, anyway, I could really go a bunch of different directions with kind of that thought, but I'm just going to leave it at that for now. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which to me reading it for the first time, this is the thing that really stands out to me a lot. Again, just Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's attitude before, like, they were thrown into the fire, in that they were determined to stay true to the God of heaven, to their God, even if they, would be burned alive, even if God didn't show up. even if they just died and that was the end of the story. Even if, you know, like, they they clearly had confidence. I mean, they knew that God was able to save them, and they were confident that He would. But they also, the fact that they had that attitude to and that kind of that humility. I don't know. I feel like that's an attitude that it would be good for everybody to have. I know it's definitely something that I would like to have about myself. So, but anyway, just a thing that I kind of stood out to me a lot in reading Daniel chapter 3. So shout out the VeggieTales version of the story. That scared me as a kid. Like when with the VeggieTales version, it like, for some reason, I mean, I can watch it now just fine, obviously, but for some reason, being like 5 years old and watching that VeggieTales episode, which it should be free on YouTube, it's what is it? I don't know. Someone comment down below, or maybe I'll try to find the link and put it in the description or comment it below or something. But anyway, so that about does it for this episode of our Daniel series. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully you enjoyed it in some way, shape, or form, got something out of it, or but anyway, but just thank you for hanging out, and hopefully I continue to get better at running kind of these very unedited, basically like live videos, but they're pre-recorded. But anyway, and so we'll see you again next time for Daniel chapter 4, which I'm trying to remember what happens in Daniel chapter 4. I don't know, it'll be interesting. So, but be there if you want. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and have an absolutely fabulous day.